Apparently I've been outed as a banker. So the good news is, if God can find a place in His kingdom for me, He can sure find a place in His kingdom for you. So I'm here to talk about Buddhism. I'm going to start by talking about how I encountered Buddhism. So I was a student at the Chaplaincy Institute, a seminary out of Berkeley. It's an interfaith seminary. And one of the requirements is that we find a religion other than the one we came to the seminary with and get a teacher. So one of my counselors suggested Zen Buddhism to me. She thought I would have an affinity for it. I found a place in Melbourne that Open Mind Zen, started attending. My first day at the Zendo, the first day I was sitting in meditation, the sensei made an announcement. He said there's a group of inmates out at Lake Correctional in Claremont that need a volunteer to come in and sit with them. So when I sat in meditation, I just kept hearing a voice. It's like, who do you think that was for? Who do you think that was for? So that started my dance with Zen Buddhism, and it started my, I guess, career now as a prison chaplain.
Just a minute.
Okay.
So they can get you where you need to sign.
Does that work?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Okay, so Buddhism's a pretty big topic. It's kind of hard to explain an entire religion in a short sermon. There's a lot of different sects. There's differences between lay practice and monk practice. What I'm going to do is tell you about my perspective as an American Zen Buddhist. I'm going to tell first the story of the Buddha. I'm going to explain his basic teaching, and then talk about the practice. But I want to start with a quote. And the quote comes from an old Zen master named Dogen. It goes something like this: to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be enlightened by the myriad of things. And I think that pretty much captures it as well as anything I've ever heard. So I'll start with the story of the Buddha, which goes back about 2,500 years. Unfortunately, Wolf Blitzer wasn't there with the Situation Room. The New York Times wasn't there with the reporter. So what's come down to us is some combination of myth and legend and some fact. And those are dished up in unknown quantities. So as the story goes, 2,500 years ago, there was a prince in India named Siddhartha. His father, of course, was a king. And in this case, king did not mean king of India. It was more like a local warlord. As warlords go, he was apparently a good king. Siddhartha's mother died in childbirth, and a hermit seer named Asita was there and made a prophecy. His prophecy was that this kid would grow up to be either a great ruler, a great king, the ruler of all of India, or he would become a religious leader, the redeemer of the world. The father, of course, as the king, knew which one he wanted.
Yeah.
So he did everything in his power to make the first prophecy come true. In the world of myth and legend, that is the surefire way to make sure that the opposite is what happened. So, the significant thing about the birth itself is that when the story is told, there are some miracles that take place. But this man who would become the Buddha, Siddhartha, at no time said that he was anything other than a human being. He's not a god, he's not the God, he's not the son of God, he's not even a distant relative. He's just a human being, an extraordinary human being, but a human being nonetheless. And the good news about that is anything he did potentially, we could do it too. So in his childhood, he's, of course, handsome, athletic, smart. He excels at martial arts. He excels at military science. He lives a fairly sheltered life because his father keeps him away from any religious training and keeps him away from any form of suffering. But his father does make sure that Siddhartha lives the good life, a life of luxury and self-indulgence, at least to the extent luxury was available at that time in India 2,500 years ago. So Dad's plan was working pretty well. Siddhartha grew up, was married, had a child, was 29 years old, and he goes out to inspect the kingdom for the first time. And this is something in Buddhism that's called the four sights. For the first time in his life, he sees sickness, old age, a corpse, and a wandering holy man. And he doesn't know what any of them are. So he has to turn to his charioteer and ask. First about the corpse, the sick man, and the elderly man. Like, what is this? And the charioteer explains it to him. And he explains all the suffering that's involved with this. All the tears shed over the corpse. All the pain and suffering the old man is going through. All the pain and suffering the sick man is going through. And Siddhartha is really distressed by this. And he asks, well, what about this wandering holy man who's dressed in rags? He says, well, this guy, this wandering holy man, this ascetic, is so concerned about suffering, he's taken up a life of self-denial to beat the problem of suffering. To transcend suffering. So that begins the Buddha's search. He too is concerned about the problem of suffering. And he goes home that night and makes a decision. A life-changing decision. He sneaks out of the palace, leaves the city, and becomes a wandering ascetic himself. So the first thing he does is he goes to the cremation grounds, takes off his royal garb, throws it away, and puts on a robe that he makes up out of scraps of material, basically taken from burnt corpses. So he sews together this kind of rag robe. Unfortunately, I forgot to bring it today. But in Zen Buddhism, we wear like a little bib. It's called a rakusu. And it's made up of little scraps of material that we've sewn together. And symbolically, that's the robe of the Buddha. So the Buddha starts his life as a ascetic. And he studies under two famous yoga teachers. He becomes their star student. He learns all sorts of things about meditation. He meets up with 5 other renunciates that he starts traveling with, and they start practicing self-denial to the nth degree. So at that time in India, holiness was equated with self-denial. So the more extreme you could be in denying anything to yourself, the more holy you were. And evidently, Siddhartha was very holy, because he practically starved himself to death. As the legend goes, he started eating less and less food, was down to like a few grains of rice a day, had become so thin you could grab his backbone by just putting your hands around his waist. His face is thin and emaciated. And sometimes you'll see statues of the Buddha as an emaciated Buddha. That's this point in his life. One day he's bending over a pond to get a drink of water. He sees his reflection in the pond and is horrified at what he sees. Not only is he horrified, he's also very weak, and he passes out and falls in the water and almost drowns. And a young girl's passing by and pulls him out and kind of nurses him back to life with rice pudding. And at that point, Siddhartha comes to one of his first insights. this life as a renunciate is really stupid. What he realizes is he's not any closer at all to finding the source and cause of suffering. He didn't get close to it by being a renunciate. He didn't get close to it by living the life of self-indulgence. So he decides to steer a middle path between self-denial and self-indulgence. And for that reason, Buddhism is sometimes called the middle path. So shortly after that, he decides that meditation is actually the path, and he sits under a pipal tree, which is kind of a fig or ficus, which will now forever be known as the Bodhi tree, where he sits in meditation for, in some versions of the story, 7 days. In other versions of the story, it's 7 times 7 days, 49 days, where he's sitting in meditation. And during this time, he's tempted and threatened by evil gods. But by the end of the meditation, he's achieved his objective. And remember, his objective was to find the cause of suffering and the end of suffering. And he finds this by gaining insight into the true nature of reality. So it's kind of hard to grasp what happened to him in that meditation. But I speculate that his experience was something like the mystical experience that saints and sages throughout history and all sorts of different religions have had. Some sort of union with God, a mystical union with God, or the experience of non-duality, experiencing the true nature of reality. And that true nature of reality is that things are impermanent, things are in a constant state of flux and flow. So from there he goes on to become a teacher, spends the next 45 years of his life on the road to India teaching what he's learned, which I'll come to in just a second. So I just want to say a word or two about his death. He lives to be about 80 years old, and he dies because he eats some tainted food, some rotten food. So the Buddha died from dysentery. Now, one of the things about Buddhism is it's nothing else not about letting go. And what could be more symbolic of letting go than dysentery? So let me talk about that first core teaching that he had. It's sometimes called the Four Noble Truths. And the first of the Noble Truths is dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A, which is usually translated as suffering. So that's kind of a hard translation. You can view it as life contains the seeds of suffering, or life is something less than satisfactory, or actually the literal etymology of the word is that dukkha means a wobbly wheel. So this is a metaphor that gets used over and over to explain dukkha. It's like a shopping cart. It's one of those shopping carts that's got the little wheel in the front that won't stay straight. It wants to wobble back and forth. So the shopping cart is still serviceable. You can push it around the supermarket. But it'd be so much nicer if the wheel just rolled straight. The second noble truth is the truth of tanha, which is the cause of the suffering. And that's usually translated as desire, or craving, or addiction. In some ways, it's our unconscious wish that reality be different than it actually is. And the third noble truth is the cessation of dukkha. And it's overcome by letting go of desire and attachment and craving and addiction. Easier said been done. The fourth noble truth is how to do it. And it's sometimes called the Eightfold Path. It's the practice itself. So let me turn to that practice. In the Eightfold Path, rather than go through all 8 of them, it's usually clumped together in 3 groups. So the first group is ethical conduct, or morality. So for Buddhists, ethical conduct is pretty much the same as it is for everybody else. We take precepts before we become Buddhists. And the 5 core precepts are: don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, stay sober, be chaste. It's pretty much what every religion says. So you're not going to find anything dramatically different about Buddhist ethics. The second group is about meditation, or the meditative practice. And it describes 2 forms of meditation. So one form of meditation is concentration. That's where you sit in meditation focused on a single point. The other kind of meditation is open awareness. And so I'd like to practice this with you. So if you could, just sit up in your chair. And in this case, you're going to have to meditate with your eyes open. So let your eyes fall in front of you, and let your eyes fall on some single point that just comes into your awareness. And see if you can really zero in on that single point. And now, without moving your eyes, try to become aware of what's out in the periphery. Then come back to the single point. And out to the periphery again. So those are the 2 kinds of meditation. One is the single point, narrow focus. The other is kind of the open awareness. The single pointed focus meditation is one that almost always brings a sense of serenity. So sometimes it's called serenity meditation. And the other is usually called mindfulness meditation, or in some traditions, vipassana. It's where phenomenon arises in your meditative field, you notice it, and just let go of it. So the third grouping on the Eightfold Path is called wisdom. And the piece that's wisdom is the result of your meditative practice. It's seeing reality as it actually is. Not as an intellectual construct, not as a thought you've had or something that you've read, but as a lived experience. It becomes your realization. When the Buddha died, one of the things he said to his followers was, in fact, this is the last thing he said to his followers, be a lamp unto yourself. Which is to say, you don't need me. You don't need me to teach you. Just take that inward turn and meditate. And all the answers will be there. So that's the basic practice. And to me, Buddhism is about happiness. It's about happiness in the here and now. And that's achieved through this process of letting go. So I can tell you that as a prison chaplain, what I've found is I have never been happier than when I'm serving somebody else. Instead of serving my own ego's needs. But serving for the benefit of others. So I'm going to finish by coming back to that quote from Dogen. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be enlightened by the myriad of things. Thank you.